So today we're going to look at 4 examples of how to find product sum pairs. You will also sometimes see this called the X games. It's not nearly as exciting as what that sounds like, but it does use an X. So first thing, a little vocabulary before we look at our 4 problems is product. That is one that we should be pretty familiar with. When we see product in math, we should make sure that we're thinking about multiplication. And then sum is when we're dealing with addition. So what we're going to be looking at today is numbers that will multiply to something and also add to something else. So they're like little number puzzles that we're going to start to explore. So in our first example, we want to find 2 numbers that multiply or have a product of 18 and add to 9. So when we start these off, sometimes it's helpful to have a little scrap paper next to us and think about what multiplies to give us 18. So when I'm going to list these out as factor pairs, so I know that 1 times 18 would give me 18. I also know that since 18 is even, 2 times 9 will give me 18. So I know 2 has to divide into 18 since it's an even number. And then 3 also goes into 18 6 times. So 3 times 6. So once I have these listed out, I don't need to relist them. I don't need to put 9 and 2 down there or 6 and 3. I already have those pairs. So the order of it doesn't matter. I like to kind of keep the smaller numbers on one side, my larger numbers on the other side. Just helps me stay organized, but you could list them either way, as long as they multiply to give you 18. So if I start to think about other things like 4 doesn't go into 18. If I try it in my calculator, like if I'm not sure, what I would do is I would type in, and I'm just trying to pull up my calculator on my phone right now, 18 divided by 4, and it gives me 4.5 or 4.5. So it's not a nice factor pair. 18 divided by 5, same thing, I get 3.6. Not a nice factor pair, so I'm not putting that there. I'm only putting down the ones that work nice. And if I remember my multiplication facts, it makes this go a lot quicker. The other piece of the puzzle, not only do we need to find numbers that multiply to be 18, those numbers also have to add to be 9. So when I look at my pairs over here, there's only one pair that would work. Like if I tried to add these together, 1 plus 18 gives me 19. That's definitely not giving me 9. 2 plus 9 gives me 11. That is not 9. 3 plus 6, oh, that gives me 9. So I know it has to be this last pair here. So my 2 numbers that would complete this would be 3 and 6. 3 times 6 gives me 18. 3 plus 6 gives me 9. So those would be the 2 numbers that would complete this puzzle. So I'm going to look at the next example because this is like our best case scenario here where we have 2 positive numbers. Fortunately, that's not always going to be the case. If we look at our second example, now we want to find 2 numbers that multiply or have a product of negative 42 and also add to be 1. So I'm going to do a little scratch work over here on the side. And I'm not going to worry about the negative right now. I'm just going to worry about what multiplies to give me 42. So I'm going to start listing these out. I've got 1 times 42 would give me 42. It's even, so I know 2 has to go in. So if I type this into my calculator, or if I think about that for a second, 42 divided by 2 gives me 21. Okay, so I'm going to try 3. Just see what happens. 42 divided by 3. Oh, it's 14, so that's a nice pair. 3 times 14 would give me 42. So I'm going to try a couple other numbers. Let's try 4. 42 divided by 4. Oh, that's a decimal. Not going to work. 5 I know isn't going to work because it doesn't end in a 0 or a 5, so I'm not going to check it. 42 divided by 6 gives me 7, so 6 times 7 would work. And then if I keep going, well, oh, I already have a 7. So that's all of my factor pairs right there. So this is where I've got to remember some rules about my integers. I've got all of them here. I need to multiply to be a negative number, which means that my signs, I'm going to have one positive number times a negative number in order for that to work. I also want to add to be a positive 1. So my numbers need to multiply to negative 42 and add to be a positive 1. I need them 1 to be a positive and 1 to be a negative. So if I look at my list and I'm seeing, well, if I try to add 1 and 42 together, whether one is positive and one is negative, nothing's going to get me anywhere close to positive 1. So I want my numbers to be really close together. So I'm going to try this pair right here, the 6 and 7. So if I try them this way, and I have 6 times negative 7. Well, 6 times negative 7 is negative 42. That works. If I do positive 6 plus negative 7, well, that's going to give me a negative 1. So I know it can't be this factor pair, at least the way it's written. I'm going to say, because that's a negative 1, though, that's pretty close to what I want. So I'm going to switch my signs. I'm going to make my 7 positive and make my 6 negative, and I'm just going to check it. I want to see, will it give me a positive 1? Positive 6 plus negative, positive 7 plus negative 6. That works. That gives me a positive 1. So those are my two numbers. 7 times negative 6 would give me negative 42. 7 plus negative 6 gives me a positive 1. So I was able to list out my factors, and I had to play with my signs a little bit. Sometimes these are not going to be as quick as that first one to figure out. Okay, let's look at our third one here. Okay, so this time we're multiplying to be 20, and we're adding to be negative 12. So first thing, just like we started the first two, we're going to think about what multiplies to give us 20. Well, 20, I can do 1 times 20. Okay, 20 is an even number, so 2 has to go in. 2 times 10 would give me 20. 3, if I try to divide 3 in, it's not going to work. 4 does work. 4 goes into 20 5 times, and then those are right next to each other. There are no other factor pairs. So for this one, it's a little bit different. We're multiplying this time to be a positive 20. But when we're adding to be a negative 12. So when we think back to the rules that we learned back in middle school about integers, when you're multiplying integers, in order for them to wind up being positive, that could be a positive number times a positive number, or it could be a negative times a negative. So that's what we're looking for here. We want to add to be a negative number, so that's telling us that our two signs are both going to have to be negative. So we want them to add to be a negative 12. So if we look over at the side, which is the pair that's going to wind up giving us any sort of 12? Well, the only one that would add to be 12 would be 2 and 10. So a negative 2 times a negative 10 gives us a positive 20. A negative 2 plus a negative 10 will give us a negative 12. So those are our numbers. So notice that I left myself lots of space for these just to help myself make some notes and kind of think these through. Okay, and here's our last case that we could have with these. Okay, so example 4, we're still finding the two numbers that work. This time we have two negatives. So we need to find two numbers that multiply to be negative 63. So I'm going to start off thinking about factor pairs of 63. Don't worry too much about the negative for right now. And then they need to add to be negative 18. Okay, so when I start thinking of these, I always go with the first one, 1 and 63. Okay, so I have my calculator here with me just in case I need to try some stuff out. So I notice it ends in an odd number, so 2 isn't going to go in, so I'm not even going to check it. So 63, I'm going to check my 3 divided by 3. Oh, goes in 21 times. Okay, 4, since it's not even, 4 isn't going to work. 5, it doesn't end in a 5 or 0, so that's not going to work. Okay, 6, we can try it. 63 divided by 6 is 10.5. That's not going to work. 63 divided by 7 is 9. And the only one that's in between is 8, and 63 divided by 8 is going to give us a decimal as well, 7.875. So that is not a factor. So we only have 3 factor pairs. So it's not a bunch of stuff that we have to look at, which is nice. So when we go back and think about what we talked about in example 2, when we're dealing with multiplying to be a negative number, in this case, negative 63, that tells us that we're going to have one positive and one negative number. We're also, the other clue that they gave us for this puzzle is we want our 2 numbers to add to be negative 18. And since they're dealing with the same numbers here, one of our numbers will be positive, the other number will be negative. So when we look at our factor pairs here, and I can kind of play with my signs a little bit. So I can almost think about these as if I were to subtract them, would one of us get me an 18? So because we're dealing with one positive and a negative. So 1 and 63, if I subtract those, I'm either going to get a negative 62 or a positive 62. So that one's not going to work. If I subtract these, 3 minus 21 is negative 18. Wait a second. That's what I'm looking for. So I can kind of play with those a little bit. And I just thought them through, but I could type stuff into my calculator and check them. And I can also write things down. I write a lot of notes to myself when I'm doing these. So I just have to make sure I place these correctly. Since I want to add to be a negative number, that means the larger of these would have to be negative. So my 21 would have to be the negative. And my 3 would have to be the positive. So I'm just going to double check myself before I go on. Okay. In my calculator, I'm just checking 3 times negative 21. Oh, that's negative 63. 3 plus negative 21. That's negative 18. So I just checked myself, just typing it in my calculator. I'm just using my phone calculator right now. But that completes my X, the 2 numbers. So what you guys are going to do is you'll be practicing this a little bit on Delta Math. And the problems will look a lot like this. So you're going to type in the numbers. I would make sure that I have scrap paper with me just so I can kind of work through some of these, and definitely your calculator handy. Okay. As always, guys, if you have questions, please let me know. Otherwise, good luck.